Hello, you beautiful humans. I miss you all terribly. I hope you're well. I hope you're healthy. And I hope you're safe. Before the interruption to our school year, we were talking about the American Civil War. And that war was fought between 1861 and 1865. What I'd like to do in this short video is give you my top 10 facts as I see it related to the Civil War and why you should care. So the first fact you already heard, and that is the dates, but it's worth repeating. 1861, 1865. Every once in a while I'll be watching television, there'll be some comedian, he'll have a microphone, he'll go out into the street and he'll talk to random people. Hey, when was the American Civil War, he'll ask. And they give all sorts of silly answers. Wasn't that in the 1980s? Didn't that happen right after World War II? Of course, the audience is laughing. So I'd really like to remember those dates. 1861 to 1865. More specifically, and you don't have to remember this, but some of you like to dig a little bit deeper, so I'll be a little more specific with the dates. Remember the Aprils. So April 12th, 1861 is when South Carolina felt like a fort that was on their territory belonged entirely to them, Fort Sumter, and they fired upon it. Now that's a federal fort, which means it belongs to the United States of America. But because they're leaving the Union and they believe it's on their territory, they fire upon it. So April 12th, 1861. The war is all over when Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant. And he does that on April 9th, 1865. The second fact I'd like you to remember is that our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, he was the president that took us through the American Civil War. He's known as the great emancipator for freeing the slaves. He's known for his humility, for his honesty, for his integrity. And students, when presidential historians rank the best presidents of all time, he's usually in the top 3, if not number 1. In some circles, he's controversial because they feel like he didn't move quickly enough on the issue of slavery. But I want you to remember as your second fact that Abraham Lincoln was the president during the Civil War. The third fact I'd like you to remember deals with casualties, or the number of soldiers that died. Of course, you have Americans fighting Americans in a civil war. The number I've read more often than not is about 623,000. So if you add up all the soldiers that we've lost and all the wars that we've fought from the American Revolutionary War right up to the present, it's about 1.3 million. So we lost half of that number in the Civil War alone. So it just shows how destructive and awful it was. The fourth fact I'd like you to remember is that about 2/3 of all the deaths that took place during the Civil War were actually from disease and not from bullets. Things like dysentery, diarrhea, malaria, pneumonia, and a lot of other infectious diseases killed nearly 2/3 of the soldiers. That's unbelievable. So make sure you wash your hands, students. The fifth fact is another personal hero of mine. I mentioned Abraham Lincoln earlier. Harriet Tubman. Now, she's known for helping slaves escape using the Underground Railroad before the Civil War started. But during the war, she actually led a raid into South Carolina and freed hundreds of slaves. Incredible. All right, before I get to the sixth fact, let's quickly review. Number one, the dates, 1861, 1865. Number two, who was the president? Did you say it? Did you say Lincoln? Well, if you did, you're right. He's our 16th president. Number three, how many died? 623,000. Fact number four, how many of those deaths about were caused by disease? 2/3. You'll have to do the math on that to see exactly what that comes to. And number five, again, personal hero of mine, Harriet Tubman. Fact number six is another famous female, Clara Barton. She was a nurse for the Union Army. Her nickname was the Angel on the Battlefield. That's a pretty awesome nickname. I had a kitty cat that lived for 18 long, beautiful years, and I named her Clara. I wanted to name one of my sons Clara, but my wife didn't think it was a good idea. The next few facts are going to be a few famous participants, generals in the Civil War. So fact number 7 is Ulysses S. Grant. Now, we didn't find Grant at the very beginning of this war, but eventually he's going to be offered the position of General of the Union Army by Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln likes him because he's not afraid to fight. Incidentally, he goes on to become our 18th president. You know, in this country, we have a history of generals doing well in war, and then they go on to be elected president. Examples: George Washington after the Revolution, Andrew Jackson after the War of 1812, Ulysses S. Grant after the Civil War. You don't have to remember all that, but I want you to remember our top general that took us through to the end of the war. And Robert E. Lee surrendered to him, as you remember from an earlier fact, is Ulysses S. Grant. Speaking of Robert E. Lee, we're up to our 8th fact. One of the reasons that this war went on as long as it did, even though the South didn't have a lot of resources in which to fight the war, is because of the skillful leadership they possessed. And nobody epitomizes that more than Robert E. Lee. He was simply a masterful general. Fact number 9. I'm going to give you 2 for the price of none. 2 generals, one for the North and one for the South. For the North, it's William Tecumseh Sherman, and he brought the concept of total war to the South. He wanted everyone to feel the wrath of war, and he marched through the state of Georgia in such a path of destruction like this country has never seen. And for the South, remember this name, Stonewall Jackson. At the First Battle of Bull Run, also called Manassas Junction, he stood firm like a stone wall, and he repulsed, with his soldiers of course, the Union advance. Now, I don't know about you, but if bullets are flying at me, I can't imagine myself standing like a stone wall. That shows a level of courage and intestinal fortitude in his character, which is why he was given that nickname, Stonewall Jackson. All right, we've made it up to the 10th fact, and that is nearly 200,000 African Americans served in the Union Army, and they also served in the Navy. And if you want to watch an amazing movie, you need to watch Glory. It stars Matthew Broderick, and I believe Denzel Washington got an Academy Award for his portrayal in the movie. It's about the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, and it is simply stunning. All right, I told you from the onset of this video I was going to explain why you should care about the Civil War. Prior to it being fought, 1776, we wrote the Declaration of Independence. And Thomas Jefferson and his committee, they wrote that all men, which means women today too, are created equal. And yet, we had so many millions of people that were kept as slaves. Once and for all, that decision was going to be made. Are we going to live up to the ideals written into the Declaration of Independence or not? And the second reason I think it's important, every morning in school, you stand up and you say the pledge. That was written by Francis Bellamy after the Civil War. And even though it's been modified a few times, the pledge says that we are one nation under God. And Francis Bellamy added this word, indivisible. Now that means we can't be divided. That means if one particular state has a problem or an issue with the federal government, they can't just leave. We are the United States of America, and the Civil War proved that once and for all. Lastly, students, I gave you a fair amount of content, and I really hope you'll listen to this more than just once. Let it sink into your bones. The videos that I put on top of the soundtrack are simply candles because I really wanted you to just think about what I was saying and why it's important. Just let it sink deep into your hard drive, and I guarantee you'll be better off for knowing this information. And maybe do a little research on your own. Find out a little bit more about Clara Barton, Harriet Tubman, Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee. These are definitely some interesting individuals. Thank you.